The most disappointing thing in a film is one that's pretty good, but has so much more potential to be pretty great. Straight away, it sounds like I'm going to be negative in this review, even when I don't want to be, so hopefully I can steer clear of turning people away from this movie entirely. The movie is Rush. It's a film I watched on a plane a few years ago and was thoroughly impressed by it after their first viewing. I appreciated its style and was engaged in its story. Now, slightly older, I see where the film could have gone to make it better and more interesting. Having seen hundreds more movies since I watched Rush last, it's difficult to watch without picking out bits that were unnecessary, cliché, or just under what they could have been. That's not to say that there is no merit in the film. It's very exciting and presents some interesting relationships. Rush acts mostly as a character study, and given that, I'm going to skip commentary on the plot and just jump straight into the characters. To be a successful movie, Rush only has to make one thing engaging, and that's the rivalry between its two main characters, Nikki and James. With that in mind, is Rush a successful movie? Yes, it is. The dynamic between the two works well in context, and it creates a very satisfying arc. It's more detailed than a simple rivalry, and the attitudes that Nikki and James have to each other evolve over the course of the film. They don't spend the whole movie with a shallow resentment of each other because of a few nasty words at the beginning of the film. The way the film concluded played heavily into this evolution in their relationship, and it made for a very satisfying ending. Part of the ending is something that distracts me overall with the film's characterization, and that's voiceover. The conclusion I wanted was only half of what occurred. I'd been hoping that Rush would end with a subtle and nuanced conversation between James and Nikki, not directly confirming their feelings about each other, but changing the nature of the way they jab at each other to show that their attitude has changed. This conversation took place and made some nice touches to their early relationship, but it was directly followed by voiceover that basically explained the subtleties of the scene. Voiceover in and of itself is not inherently negative in a film, and there are some great uses of it, but when used in Rush, it felt dumbed down and cliché. This isn't something that would bother people who will appreciate a hint in understanding the final scene, but to me it felt unnecessary, which is what I would say about most of the voiceover in Rush. Early on, the way we are introduced to Nikki and James is via them describing their life so far. I think this aims to draw similarities between the two, but I feel most of what was said by them comes up later in the film through conversation anyway, again making the voiceover unnecessary. One of the most interesting aspects of the two characters and their similarities is how characters in the film, and I presume most audiences, react to James and Nikki's different styles of confidence. I don't think it's the intention of the film to make this comment or inspire this discussion, but I think it's interesting that although both characters are overly confident in themselves and mostly braggadocious, the way they portray it makes a huge difference in how they're perceived. James manages to come off as charming and larger than life, but although what he says is not at all different from Nikki, Nikki comes off as arrogant and sour. It's a testament to performances throughout the film that I picked up on this as well. Chris Hemsworth's relaxed body language works well against Nikki's more precise body language, and works well to highlight important character traits that help build tension towards the end of the film. Something that could have been done better with the characters is weaving the events of their personal lives into their motivation on the racetrack. There are spots where this is done well, but overall most of the scenes that take place outside of the racetrack or between James and Nikki feel detached from the main story, and because of that, kind of boring. I said at the beginning that I appreciated the style of Rush when I first saw it, and for the most part I still do. However, there are some things that I feel are overdone regarding its aesthetic. This comes down to color, as the cinematography and editing suit Rush's aesthetic perfectly. The colors are suitably vibrant for the subject matter of the film. I want to say that I understand the decision to make Rush look kind of surreal, given that a lot of the movie deals with how dangerous F1 driving is. All the characters are so close to death, and they discuss the associated feeling of being more alive than ever when on the racetrack, so vibrancy in the colors of the film is a good idea. My opinion of it is that it's not executed with enough precision. I edit photos pretty regularly, and the vibrancy of this film reminds me of when I first started experimenting with color, and how I used to think making them stand out was really important. What I would end up doing because of this is oversaturating my photos, and it made it look unprofessional and amateurish, which is how I feel about Rush. I'm not claiming to be a professional color editor, but I think more attention should have been paid to what each shot looked like with the style of vibrancy. As I said, the cinematography and editing are much better. I'm not normally a fan of quick cuts, but that's usually in the context of action, because it obscures what's happening on screen and it makes it hard to follow. Rush, on the other hand, features cars, and it's easier to assume the movements of the car so long as you have some idea of the track. Rush uses this to its advantage, especially in the build-up to a race beginning, quickly showing all the moving parts of the cars in a way that gets the blood pumping. Seeing so much going on before the race has even started builds anticipation for the race itself, and once it does, Rush uses each race sparingly so as not to make it boring, which is another good decision. Sports movies have trouble with keeping the audience engaged if they're not already engaged with the sport in question. When a game or race is featured too heavily or for extended periods of time, it's easy to make the viewers tune out of what's happening, and I think Rush's filmmakers understand that. To counter this feeling, they only show what's necessary of each race and break them up with character-based scenes and expertly done montages. The titles and title cards in Rush are used better than in most movies. They are designed to look interesting and to integrate into what's happening in the film. When the first montage begins, it has to separate several races taking place in different countries from each other, and it does this by showing the poster for each race to the film. Rather than having it simply fade in, however, they use the cinematography to make shots that match up with the next poster and generally meld with what's happening on screen. It's smooth and it's fun to watch, and overall it's very engaging in scenes that otherwise wouldn't have been. With all these things in mind, it's up to you if you want to watch Rush. I think it's worth it, and I don't think many people will be as critical of it as I have been.
Rush? That's a 7.